Hey everyone, Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd. Hope you are doing well. And it's been a minute, it's been a while, but it's time for an exclusive conversation and interview with the one and only producer, songwriter, rapper, singer, also commentator as well, Mr. Open Mike Eagle, Mr. Dark Comedy himself, who is in the midst of a tour right now, performing multiple places and dates. We will link down below. It's on MikeEagle.net, right?
It is. Everything's on MikeEagle.net. You can find it all there.
We love an artist with an updated website. Sometimes you bring up the website and they're like, oh shit, I haven't updated it in months. You keep an updated website.
I definitely keep the tour dates updated for sure.
Good. At the very least, you've got to do that. At the very least, you've got to do that.
There's a direct line between accessible tour dates and money. It's a very direct line.
I think weirdly that's kind of the advantage of the older millennial artist, because now that websites and sort of like independent platforms are not quite as big as they once were, and a lot of kind of newer, younger artists are going into promo on the internet blind without that sort of, I don't know what you would want to call what we have, like maybe 2000s era GeoCities experience or something.
Yeah, where you know a little bit of HTML that you can use in a pinch,
from altering the MySpace page, that MySpace experience.
But one of the things that I've kept consistent is that every time my website gets redesigned, my tour page is always linking back to my Tumblr, because I can always update that on my own. And with, I tour a lot, so I need to be updating that thing all the time. So I think it's reflective of the mindset you're talking about. It's like I've had some very great advanced, 3D modeled websites you can point and click and walk around through, but the tour dates page is always going to be my Tumblr.
Okay.
I can change that.
Before we dig too deep into anything else too meta, let's talk about the new record, Doomed. Mm-hmm. By the time people are seeing this on YouTube, it will be out. It will be just out, in fact, on this record. You're not only teaming up with Kenny Segal, but you're also following up pretty quickly the record that you dropped last year. What sort of kind of caused this new album cycle and this new collab with Kenny to come together so quickly?
Man, I have just hit a point in my creative life where, and some of it is because of, the thing we always track about the music business contracting and, how hard it is to survive these days economically. I sort of looked around, I'd say it was about 3 years ago, where my financial situation was getting dire. And I was like trying to quit, kind of. Like I was trying to get a job. I was going to like be a civilian. And I found out I was unhireable, Anthony. My resume does not look like the resume of a person who's really interested in having a civilian job. So that road dried up. And so I sort of looked around and realized I needed to work a lot harder than I've been working. I needed to turn up my output. I think that I was being a little, I was resting on my laurels a little bit, because I've done a bunch of stuff. And I think that I came into this part of my career thinking, done all these albums, I've done all these tours, I've had these television shows, I've done all this stuff that I was able to sort of create at my own pace, but that's not true. So I turned it up. I've been touring more. I've been setting an intention towards cranking up my productivity on the album front too. And so, because I was already in that mind state, and me and Kenny were working together on Neighborhood Gods Unlimited, which came out last year. And me and him sort of had an agreement that, because he had told me before I started making that album that he was no longer really interested in just having a couple beats on an album. Like he really likes to produce a project. That's when he feels like he gets the most out of his skill set. And so we sort of had an agreement that if he let me use a couple of beats for Neighborhood Gods Unlimited, we needed to have a thing finally after that. And so the table was kind of set for it creatively. I had finished my touring last week and I was full of creative energy. Um, Went through something that gave me a lot to write about. I all of that encountered a trove of beats from him that I thought was really amazing. And I actually made this is probably the quickest album I've ever made. This is probably the fastest I've ever created a project from start to finish. And I'm really happy with it, really proud of it. I'm proud of myself for being able to do it, but I think we did excellent work here.
And from what I understand, kind of going into this, this is also kind of a concept album too. Like, what is the story behind this progression of tracks? Like, what is the story you're telling?
Well, okay, so the full title is Doomed. Rap songs about a universe that ends in every possible universe. Now, it's informed by a breakup that I was going through at the time. Like I said, I had a lot to write from that. But then I sort of looked around my life, and even after that, felt like, for lack of a better word, I was getting broke up with a lot, like in different facets of life. Like things were coming to an end all the time. So it sort of put me in this mindset of like, just all these different ways a thing can end. And the underpinning analogy of it all is a breakup. But I even, I had some lines in the album about how, I had to have a last visit with my primary care physician a few years ago because I was on
nothing like a doctor breakup.
Right. You know what I'm saying?
A medical breakup.
Exactly. Like, and that idea of just those last conversations and, these relationships, whether you have them as romantic or professional or friendship and things, like they all have an ending. And so as I was going through all of that sort of became where I was writing from. The whole thing.
And in addition to that, something that I would also love to hear you kind of get into a little bit is the way that you present yourself as an artist in recent years has kind of like shifted over the course of the 2020s because, with the release of, Component System, like your embrace of like the tape deck head, was like pretty clear and obvious. You made that pretty clear, your initial intentions with kind of like, going into that. But you've like really kind of stuck with that as like a look and a way of putting yourself out there. Is there a reason that you've continued to kind of like lean into this? Is this like giving you the capacity to sort of, engage in your work and maybe more of a character kind of standpoint, or maybe give yourself the artistic freedom to do what you do in a different way now that people are kind of seeing you presented in a different fashion?
I do think there's an armor capacity to it. I think that I'm a very accessible person. I think I'm uniquely accessible as a rapper. And I feel like that costs me a lot in terms of the types of interactions and frequency of interactions I have with people. And so there was a little bit of an inclination to protect my creative self a little bit more. And I think that's where some of the desire to obfuscate came from. But then, beyond that, once I settled on that and once I was able to really take in the image of that, I just really like that iconography. I think there is something to that presentation, and specifically that it's like a 90s shelf stereo system that is large enough that my skull can fit into it. I think that sort of points at my artistic values in a way that I really enjoy perpetuating.
Yeah, it creates like a little bit of distance and anonymity, but also in a way to anybody who's like in the know or has a certain kind of taste. It signals like a certain era or aesthetic of sound,
Indeed.
That's sort of like familiar and intimate to you in terms of like your introduction to the genre.
Exactly, 100%.
Right. Well, I mean, do you sort of like, I guess, sort of see this kind of morphing into something else even further from here? Was part of your decision to do this kind of informed by, I don't know, the weird way in which I feel like a lot of artists are currently expected to be completely flayed open in the internet age in terms of how they present themselves and promote their music these days. I mean, it's definitely far different than it once was when you were first putting yourself out there. And, you know, over the course of that time, you've seen TikTok come to rise, you've seen short form, you have also dabbled in streaming too.
Yeah, you know, and I don't, all of those ways that you just listed that artists are expected to engage with the world, I typically don't involve my, you know, that headpiece in a lot of it. Like, you know, I do photos with it. You know, there's a channel rewards thing on my live stream on Twitch where people can spend enough points and I'll put it on. But it's not like that is a different part of me that I am engaging with when it comes to live streams, when it comes to most social media. So it's less for that specifically. But like I said, because of all of the access points that people have to me, it does make me want to create a space that is inaccessible. And you know, the iconography sort of comes from there.
It's almost like every single thing all creators of all types have to do is be constantly putting themselves out there, constantly be on this hamster wheel and like, you know, have this kind of certain level of authenticity demanded of them all the time. Be yourself, be yourself, be yourself, be yourself, be unfiltered, say what's on your mind, you know, be that, as you say, like completely accessible person. And then when you go to sit down and make something that is supposed to be artful and coming from a place of passion, it's almost like I got to be myself again. Like I've been being myself all day. You know, it feels way less sexy to sort of like, you know, almost like dissect myself once again, or sort of like lay myself out there on the line once again. And again, I can imagine putting that mask on. It creates maybe almost even an MF Doom type dynamic, even if you're not coming up with a villain persona to go along with it.
Exactly. You know, I think it's just straight survival, man. And I think there's a deeper truth that, and I've talked about this sometimes too. It's like, yeah, you're being yourself doing all these things, but you're being different parts of yourself, you know, and the different parts of myself don't even always understand each other. You know, like my creative self is very far removed from the self that is live on Twitch 3 times a week. It's not the same part of me. That's an experience of relationship I'm having with people. It's usually about music that's not mine. It's a different aspect of myself than the self that's sitting, exploring my feelings about very complicated issues and trying to make all of that make sense musically. So for me, it's really important for myself that I'm aware of all of that and not trying to cross it up in places where it's uncomfortable, because that doesn't necessarily serve any of the purposes that I'm needing to serve out here.
I mean, since you bring it up, let's get into that. For anybody who's watching and is not in the know, Mike is a regular streamer, hosts a great morning show, as he calls it. And, you know, is very entertaining, very insightful, and interact with your chat regularly and talk about a lot of current events and topics, much in the same way that you guys might expect, you know, on the Fantano channel or whatever, but from his own perspective and, you know, on topics and, you know, on subjects that you have, you know, way more insight than I do from, you know, your life experience. You know, kind of moving into this lane, was this like, you know, part of that realization that I need to be working more, I need to be grinding more, or I could do that, I have more capacity to put myself out there more? Or was it maybe more informed by what you were seeing out there in terms of like the current landscape of commentary and music, and thinking like, with my experience, I can sort of like talk about this in a way that few other people can? Or was it some other third thing, or a mixture of all of those?
You know, I do think it's a mixture. And I think that the origin of me streaming on Twitch was me doing a thing called quarantine drive time radio in the pandemic. Me and my collaborator Video Dave, we went live on Instagram every day, or every weekday during the pandemic, as sort of just a grounding thing, because everything was so up in the air and it was so much we couldn't control. it was a grounding thing for us. It became a grounding thing for this community that we sort of grew around it. And on that, you know, we would present it like a news program or like a radio show. So we would talk about news, we would talk about music. And so I did find that I had a capacity and an interest in doing that. And now I can't say when I started Twitch necessarily that I had a thought towards trying to do commentary. I can honestly say I didn't really even understand what commentary was, or like the industry of it when I first started Twitch. But me starting Twitch, I think I'd maybe been doing it for a year around the time when you know, Kendrick and Drake battle starts. B, Diddy getting arrested. That was a big moment too, because that was a very particular moment that me, as somebody who's been into underground hip hop, or just a fan of hip hop since the mid 90s, like I was part of a population that had been trying to call him out for years, in different ways, sometimes through songs, sometimes through people trying to highlight stories of people that he had harmed. And so I did feel like I was uniquely suited to speak on that, from the position of, okay, so we've been trying to point out concerns about a person for 30 years. What does it take to actually get people to listen? It's sort of where I was coming from. And just really in the middle of a Twitch stream, just yapping about it. But, you know, I put that up on YouTube because that conversation was unfolding there. And I was like, oh, okay, this is a discussion that's ongoing and happening and people are interested in. And I'm seeing some interest in people from hearing what I've got to say about it because of my life experience. And so with that, I started experiment and seeing like, okay, what am I actually interested in talking about? What are people interested in talking about? And how much can we make that an intersection? And like I said, the Drake and Kendrick battle was a special time.
Yeah, it was
a lot
a huge
of that
moment. Everybody
it
saw
was. And it's been really fascinating to me now, because now that it's over, I am questioning my space in commentary, or I feel like I am reevaluating it. Because, and I said this in a video recently, I feel like part of why that moment was so huge is because a lot of people were interested in it for a lot of different reasons. Like, some people were interested in the battle rap songs, did the song slap. Some people are interested in nerding out about the bars and what did this mean? Is this a triple entendre? A lot of people were just interested in the mess, in the gossip, in is this guy a domestic abuser? Is this guy a pedo? Like that was, a lot of people had a lot of different areas of interest in this, and they converged to this point where people would watch almost anybody talk about this. And now that that's sort of over, I feel like the discourse is split into people who care about the mess, people who care about the nerdy stuff, people who care about the music business. And there's nothing necessarily bringing them all together now. And there's definitely a couple of those buckets, which is stuff that I don't really care to talk about. It's not interesting to me. So, you know, it's an ongoing thing. Like while I'm on the road, I'm seeing some things happening where I'm like, okay, that could be interesting. But I just really want to make sure that I am not bending myself to try to be interested in stuff I'm not actually interested in order just to keep a revenue stream coming in.
Right. No, I mean, there has been kind of a growing sentiment. I've even seen, you know, guys like Rory and Mal comment on this in terms of this feeling that like a lot of the discourse has kind of shifted in a way to where you're right. There are all of those separate camps where people care about those specific things that they are interested in. But it feels like more often than not, it is the drama and mess camp that it drowns everything else out. It feels like that side of the discourse, as much as they are sort of separate in terms of who's the most interested in what, one's definitely louder than the other two. And it's sort of the fact that it is so loud does kind of like overtake the other two, or definitely overshadow the exposure that people have to other stuff, because the more people talk about that, the less maybe we're exposing new artists or talking about new talent or talking about, you know, new interesting sort of sounds and trends that are going on, or, you know, putting people on who could potentially become that next Drake or Kendrick or whatever.
Yeah. And, you know, there are certain personalities for that you can see that they are the face of it, and you can see that their ability to stay atop the discourse is fueled by an interest in mess that never seems to wane. And, you know, and I just think I have to be honest about what this is, you know, and not try to make it something that it is not. Because there are people who are interested in the stuff that I'm interested in, but there's a lot more people who are interested in the stuff that I'm not interested in. And I feel like, unfortunately, it seems to me like that level of consumption is really the engine that powers a lot of this stuff, in terms of the economy of it. And, you know, like I said, I'm just always having to reevaluate how far into that I'm willing to go.
I mean, you know, as I was kind of referring to, there are elements of this that makes you uniquely good at this sort of thing, because again, you sort of have that experience standpoint from being in the industry for as long as you do and being an artist as well. Are there moments in your experience so far in doing these streams and doing these commentaries and having them go as far out into the world as they do, and also standing shoulder to shoulder to some extent with guys like Justin Hunt, you know, for example, who've been, you know, in the journalism industry on the hip hop side for a long time. Are there ways in which kind of, you know, dipping your toes in these waters have made your artist life complicated or whatever? You know, it's because I feel like oftentimes, you know, that sort of like critic artist line, there's a lot of tension there between that line. I mean, you know, and I know there's lots of artists who don't really like me because of what I do and so on and so forth. And it's understandable. I don't expect people to just like me. I mean, you know, the artist critic kind of dynamic is contentious, you know, and while you're not a reviewer per se, you know, you are putting your opinions out there, and, you know, have you run into a situation where maybe that rubs somebody the wrong way, or you're sort of afraid to kind of call something out in the way that you feel is necessary because of kind of, you know, those who you know or those who you've had experiences with before because of, you know, your time in the industry?
I would say that it does get complicated, but I feel like it gets less complicated for me and more complicated for people covering me as an artist. I think that's where it gets complicated. I think, you know, all of us being
I am afraid of a bad review on your stream.
I mean,
once the morning show comes for me, it's over.
We're all nice over there. We're all nice over there on the morning stuff.
I'm kidding.
But you know, but you know, the you know, obviously the thing that you're joking about there, the reverse is it's on the table, right? Like, me and you can have a conversation like this. Me and you can have a conversation on Culture United. You can choose to review or not review my project. You could choose to give it a 2. You could choose to give it an 8. And it's like, I feel like that's more complicated for you as a critic than it is for me as an artist. Now, because of that, I understand why a Joe Budden, for instance, feels like he has to retire in order to fully inhabit the critic space. I do get that, because you do put other people in an awkward position. But I haven't run into. I'm sorry, do you hear the birds out here? The birds are so loud.
You know, a little nature sounds are completely fine. Very, very okay. Relaxing. But to your point, Joe Budden's still moving though. He's doing true crime now. Have you seen?
Oh, I did see
he's doing
some
true
headline.
Crime. He's doing true crime content.
Well, see, he's not rapping though. That's the whole thing.
Yeah, no, it's true. But I mean, you know, he's going into new waters because we have yet to explore, even fully understand the boundaries between music commentator and true crime commentator. We don't know what kind of conflicts of interest can come up in the midst of that yet.
Yeah, you know,
Joe is going to illustrate them.
he might get into a position where he can't talk about something because of criminals that he knows. In real life, who knows? Who knows? But you know, so okay, for the most part, I'm not too worried about it, though it does feel awkward at times. Um, I think that when I am in the middle of a rollout, uh, it does give me like I almost don't want to center other people's music quite as much when I'm in the middle of a rollout. And it's not like I'm being unrealistic about the scale or my impact or trying to put myself on the same level as other people. It's just like I get in the mindset of, wait a minute, if I'm centering somebody else's stuff and it's my music, then it's like just giving permission to other people to do the same thing. You know what I'm saying? Like, and there's going to be people that do that, but I feel like if it's me, then I maybe shouldn't so much. One thing that I encounter sometimes is because I make, you know, critical statements about other people's music at times. It will make music fans sometimes say very mean things to me about my own career. Like I was reading something on Twitter yesterday. Somebody got mad at something I said when I was like going through the Pitchfork 100 best rap albums of all time, and I dismissed some project that I hadn't heard of. And this guy was like, "That album had more impact than your whole career." I'm like, okay, guilty as charged. But I understand that because that is the choice that I'm making in speaking on, you know, rap at large, is that I put myself in the way of comments like that. And I don't take it personally. So I think that's fine.
No, I mean, in private conversations, and a lot of people who are fans would never know this, but like some of the people who I have talked to who have the strongest and most negative and sometimes most dismissive opinions on music I've ever heard are other artists, you know, but
for sure.
You wouldn't know because, you know, in a lot of cases it's career suicide to be saying this or that or the other thing. And, you know, while, from my own standpoint, a critic can get a lot of really harsh and unnecessarily nasty pushback for saying this project's bad, whatever. But like, you know, in a lot of people's perspectives, for an artist to do that, that's almost like especially in a public way, that's like a betrayal, you know, right. It's like, we're both artists, or you're an artist. You're supposed to respect and love other artists. You can't have these opinions and be voicing them. So, you know, for an artist, professional artists kind of like pull punches in that way. It's, I understand it. I get it.
Yeah. I mean, you know what? I always go back to this thing. Fonte, shout out to Fonte, told me a long time ago. He told me we just outright shouldn't talk about what we do with people who don't do it. And obviously what I'm doing is completely antithetical to all of that. But I know what he means though, because a lot of times, and this came up in a lot of the Lupe stuff too. Sometimes the points that we are trying to make of the place that we're coming from is difficult to explain to people who don't have the experience of writing raps, freestyling on the corner, putting an album together, selling something hand to hand, getting signed to a record label, going on tour. Like, it really does give you a different perspective on a lot of stuff. And it's not always easy to unpack the difference in perspective. And it just sound like you hating, but it's like, no, you're just looking at it from a completely like a rarer air. And it's not to say that it's better or worse. It's just like it is very different. It puts you in a very different space in how you think about rap music when you've done all these things.
You know, talking about the Lupe thing, because I remember from your coverage on that topic, one of the most interesting points, at least to me, that you made in the midst of all of that was this feeling or this perspective that as a rapper, I'm the best, is a very common perspective. And even you feel that on some level. But, you know, speaking purely as like a fan and somebody who's just observing the genre from the outside, I would love to know how you kind of like, you know, square the circle of like, at least from my viewpoint, it seems like the genre culturally has become so varied and so fragmented and so diverse in terms of like different approaches and different styles and what people are going to kind of gauge as what's actually good or the best. Has the rubric of what makes you the best completely changed and shifted to the point where how do you even sort of like, you know, effectively compete with your peers when they're trying to do something completely different from you? You know, they're not even like competing on the same fronts as you or anybody or Lupe artistically because they're going for something else that's not even comparable.
I think that is sort of baked in at this point. And you know, I really think with that, we all think we're the best thing. It's important to put a finer point on it and saying that like it really is the best in terms of each person's artistic values. Like I'm going to make what I think are the best choices to make on this beat, on this song, even if there's other people on. Like, I think that what I've done is the best thing to do. And so, yeah, like does that mean that I am competing with, you know, Nine Vicious? No. It doesn't mean I'm competing with Clips or anybody because we're all sort of playing in different sandboxes. We all have different artistic goals. I think that more what I'm trying to point at is like within that sandbox, Nine Vicious for sure thinks he is the best. Within that sandbox, Pusha T definitely thinks he is the best. And within mine, I think I'm the best. And that's not to say that it means that I think anybody's not good. It's just that like there's a sort of foundational audacity to doing any of this. And especially to doing it over and over again and encountering all of the pushback that you get from the world to even continue. That I think that it all starts with this foundational belief that like what I have to say is a thing that everybody should hear. And I think that when you're engaging in conversation with rappers, you almost have to keep that in mind because we can't say that, but it is the truth for all of us.
A lot of these kind of cultural shifts that we've been seeing are generational too, obviously. And you've been open about this in your commentaries and your streams as well. But, you know, you're a father, you have a son, he's a passionate music fan as well. And a lot of these changes, given his music taste, are things that you've like witnessed just by virtue of being a dad and seeing the kind of music and sort of like cultural exposure points that your own son is kind of seeing. Like, you know, I guess what I'm trying to get at here is like, in your own perspective, as somebody who's an artist and has his own kind of like strong opinions on all of this as well, like, you know, how do you kind of navigate that dynamic and that relationship? Do you ever find yourself having to kind of catch yourself and just be like, okay, you know, I have these old headed opinions or whatever.
Sure.
Like, I don't want to push that envelope and be rude and be dismissive and be nasty, but simultaneously, like as a parent, I also want to relay information and experience to my son who I feel like deserves perspective that I have gained.
100%. And I think that, you know, my son's tastes are very much his own. We raised him off of, you know, Shabazz Palaces and MF Doom and Serengeti. I mean, me and his mom, like that's
right, you were talking about that in your Sub Pop video.
Yeah, exactly.
Playing Black Up in the Car.
Exactly. And he loved that. And then I remember, feel like there was, I want to say, I'm pretty confident it was a Drake song he heard one day. And he really responded to the production of it. Like we were playing him all of this dirty stuff that we like, all of this like messy underground stuff. He loved how clean mainstream rap sounded. And so he would start to ask to hear that type of thing. And as his taste has developed, the underground rap that he's into is the post Cardi, post Uzi. I mean, and I say post, these guys are obviously still here, but I think that people who have been influenced by those two a lot, that's his underground. He loves his underground the same way I loved my raucous MF Doom underground of the 90s. And yeah, the sound is way out. And on one hand, I tell him all the time that like some of these hood young dudes are pushing it so far that it ends up sounding almost like Anticon or something, you know what I'm saying? It ends up sounding
it almost becomes like a weird 2000s noise rap kind of thing. And I draw that comparison sometimes too on like my streams, but a lot of the younger kids like don't
know
hear it or they don't know, you know. It's like you could lead the horse to water, but you know, a lot of the time they're just kind of like whatever, you know. I don't know if that's because of a lack of curiosity or even maybe I think it's so important, special to a lot of them that what they're doing and what they're listening to remains something that they perceive as like theirs.
Right.
That like finding an outside comparison or a predecessor would almost kind of like ruin that sense of like, no, this is our thing.
True. I mean, to me though, and I understand that, but I also think it's interesting because it is absolutely not influenced by that stuff that came before.
Yeah, I just
like
think it's
more interesting that it's ending up there.
Yeah, just kind of lined up that way.
But I also wanted to say that I think what's uniquely good about the situation with me and my son too is that he is interested in what I think about the stuff that he's listening to because he knows I do this for a living. He knows I talk about it also for a living, and he doesn't need me to agree, but he's interested in what I think in a way that opens up all of those conversations. So I never have to hold my tongue in terms of what I like about something, what I don't like about something. And it doesn't change his mind ever, but he sort of keeps himself aware of what I think as his old head dad.
That's a beautiful thing.
It is. It is. I agree.
So, I mean, you know, along with this new sort of like generation of underground, which, you know, operates by a totally different artistic ethos and set of boundaries, we still have thriving, you know, surprisingly and very nicely, the underground that, you know, guys like you helped sort of pioneer over, you know, the 2000s and 2010s. Obviously we still have figures like you around creating. We have guys like Billy Woods, who, for example, is in so many ways bigger than he's ever been, at least from my perspective. I feel like I run into more people on a daily basis who know Billy Woods.
That's absolutely true.
Than I would have ever guessed in the 2011, 2012, when I first started running across his music. Like from your vantage point, because we've seen a lot of artists come and go, labels come and go, trends come and go over the past 10 plus years. Like, where do you feel like indie rap, underground, what we mean is that term when we were calling it that when we were younger, like what is the state of that right now? Is it healthy? Is it, you know, a place that's bringing in new listeners? Do you see new and exciting artists on a regular basis? Do you still think that, you know, sounds are being pioneered and listeners are being challenged, and that in terms of message and ethos that is still standing for the same stuff that it once did? And I know I'm still going here, but you know, part of the reason I'm thinking about this is like I've been reading a lot of books and kind of like, you know, talking to a lot of people who are my age and are kind of like reflecting on the indie scene. And one of their biggest kind of like, you know, regrets or kind of issues looking back is like, man, how quickly the kind of DIY ethos of this genre and this culture that we kind of like fostered through the 90s and 2000s just like went out the fucking window. You know, the moment that, you know, a lot of these bigger bands hit the mainstream and you saw a lot of these like kind of big advertising contracts coming in, and, you know, a lot of these websites that we're now seeing getting hollowed out, like bought out and flushed down the toilet, multiple layoffs, so on and so forth. And it feels like to me, a lot of people with kind of like my experience as just, you know, kind of like an older white indie fan have kind of seen that again, flushed down the toilet, hollowed out, completely gotten rid of. But over this same length of time, we've also seen like this really kind of healthy indie rap scene kind of, you know, come up and support and sustain artists like you for a long time. And, you know, still you're doing your thing. Where do you feel like that has kind of moved over that same kind of like timeline? Where is it at now versus when it was like, you know, first starting to kind of like get the ball rolling?
So I feel like one of the ways that it's been able to stay consistent, and even that consistent is tough because it's changed so much. Right. It's changed so much. I tend to look at these things economically first. And when I first got into the game, there were a lot of what I would call like mid-sized indie labels that were indie rap labels that because of the revenue that came from CD sales, were able to really sign a lot of rappers, keep a lot of rappers having careers. And as things went from CD to downloading to streaming, the vast majority of those labels disappeared. and with it, the viability of having a career for a lot of people. Now, what sort of happened around the time of that sort of, I guess, never stopped happening is that bigger indie rock labels, your Fat Possums and your Warp, um, they're still on the lookout for like indie rap that's viable. And I think when they invest in an artist, especially like an indie rap artist, like a little investment goes so far. A little bit of marketing, a little bit of real big time promotion can really make viable stars out of people when it's done right. And there's been a through line of that. I think where I get really worried about it is there used to be a pipeline from selling CDs out of the trunk to getting one of those mid-sized record deals to being able to figure out DIY touring in a way that would allow you to have a career viability that nobody could take. If you're just starting now, I don't know how you do that, because if you're just starting now, the obvious avenues towards career viability seem more through like TikTok. And I think for the particular strand of indie rap you're asking about, there's no worse environment to try to get going than TikTok, than like a 1 minute, face to camera, try to catch your attention. Like, that's not what we do. That's like the complete opposite of what it is that we do. Like, you need to stretch your legs out with us. You need 30 minutes. You need 40 minutes. You need to sit with an album. You need to want to dig back into it because you didn't catch everything the first time. Like, and I don't know what the environment is or the pathway is for starting a career with that these days. It seems like the only thing that I've seen left is helping hands from older artists in the scene already, which is good, but I don't want that to be the only way that people can get known. I feel like that'll end up being the death of it if there stops being a way for talented, creative, thoughtful indie rappers with ambitions to figure out career viability. That's what I'm worried about.
Shifting, but still jumping off of a point that you just kind of made, do you feel like those platforms that people are getting serviced rap on, be it a TikTok or whatever, that being somebody's, kind of like window into that genre because they're spending time on that app, do you feel like that's leading to a larger sort of like wider degradation of, I don't know, maybe what you or I could perceive as like being lyrical quality? Because if what you're saying isn't going to be received and interpreted immediately the first time that you heard it, it's not worth saying. And, these days, at least on kind of like a mainstream level, it seems like more often than not, when somebody is willing to hit replay on a bar, it's mostly because there's an incentive there to be like, oh, well, who's this about? Or like, oh, what's the drama here? Or who's like, who is this shot at? Who is that shot at? Which we saw most recently with Iceman.
Right.
Do you feel like that's kind of contributing to that phenomenon, the fact that things have to move so quickly and be received and interpreted so immediately?
Yes, but I think that what is also happening, or maybe it's always been that way, but I think I'm seeing very clearly, is that people who want what we make are not looking for it on TikTok. So yes, there's an incredible amount of music consumption is happening on there. And the people who are looking, whatever they're looking for, they're getting what they want. And probably increasingly so. But there is this stable, it's hard for me to know how many people it is. Let's say it's a pool of 500,000 monthly listeners. If we're using like streaming service terms, those people who like this, they're not on there. So I think the ones of us who are servicing them, that degradation isn't crossing over to us. We're not thinking about that. we're continuing to do what we do and finding ways to serve people who are interested in this other thing.
In your experience, obviously, because, you know, you haven't just simply catered to the same exact audience the entire time of your career. And I know that, you know, from a marketing standpoint and a commentary standpoint, TikTok is often painted as that app where new things are happening, young people are there, da, 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 da. You know, if you're kind of like in this hypothetical limiting things off from that app because people are just not digesting content in there that way, like where are those little sort of like, you know, places on the internet where you do see yourself eking out the ability to gain some exposure to some new listeners who wouldn't have stumbled across you otherwise?
I mean, I think that's the question. I think that is the question that I'm looking for the answer for. Not necessarily for me, but just for people younger than me. And
for example, through what you've been doing maybe in the commentary space on Twitch and on YouTube, have you had in your experience people who like kind of stumble across maybe your thoughts on, you know, given topic XYZ and then actually find out about your music that way?
Yep. And not only has that happened, increasingly, I'm seeing that at shows, like newer fans who are there because their primary consumption from me is commentary, but they like the music too, and they want to come support, and they want to come be around where people value this type of stuff. So there certainly has been some increase from there. If it is a viable path towards like consistent new people, I haven't quite figured that out yet. But I maybe haven't tried. Like, I think that, you know, looking forward with my engagement on YouTube, I am trying to be more mindful of ways to engage with it in ways that are successful, but also centers my work, centers the work of people who I'm interested in or connected to, like this scene, like trying to find ways to put that more forward in the commentary space.
Given that, I mean, a suggestion of two crazy things. One, Open Mike Eagle tour, double bill, one half is music. The other half is
one half is yapping.
The other half is a chair gets put down, and then
there's a screen
and you're reacting to videos, and you're like, well, the reason that this is, you know,
hit that Vine boom, live boom.
And you could even stream it and have people on their phones chatting.
Oh my God!
Be like, oh, look, so and so says this. You know?
Wow, what a nightmare, Anthony! What a nightmare!
What a nightmare! What a nightmare! And you could call it the nightmare. You can call it the nightmare tour.
Gosh.
So there's that. But also, you know, it's funny the way in which you're kind of describing, and this is something I've also been kind of like going back to in the age of AI, because there's like so much kind of like terrible, bad, lazy media that I feel like we're getting flooded with, and it's really made me kind of, you know, nostalgic for it, but also like a little curious, because this was a lot of this was a little bit before my time, you know, kind of going back to like kind of these eras of zines, you know, in sort of punk and underground music spaces. And, you know, oftentimes like a lot of these people that ran these little zines, which like for many scenes were kind of vital in terms of like spreading information, getting the names of certain bands and artists out there. A lot of these zines, which in their own little way were kind of like journalistic outlets, all their own, were also run by other artists or people who were kind of like, you know, ingrained in the music scene in a very sort of direct way. So, I mean, you know, with that as kind of like a lineage point, what you're doing in a way is not even all that different than sort of like, I'm an artist, I'm a creator, but in my own way, on my own space, and my own platform, I'm also doing commentary and talking about sort of the world in which I exist and other artists and sort of trends and things happening.
It really sounds like I need to find out more about that, because part of the difficulty of trying to straddle these two worlds is that it feels awkward because it feels new. Like it feels like, ugh, nobody's ever done this before. This feels strange. But I don't know. It's just interesting to hear that history exists, because that, I don't know if. Yeah, I feel like I should dig more into that.
Well, you know, for a lot of these, like, you know, extreme genres of metal and punk music, like no other outlets would cover them, you know,
right.
Before
so
reaching any kind of commercial viability. So they had, yeah, exactly. They had to cover themselves because nobody else was going to write about it anywhere else, you know?
Yeah. I guess I think it's part of it is just psychological for me, right? Because
Hmm.
my default thinking for commentary is that I need to be talking about stuff people know about already. Like that is just sort of where my brain engages with.
I feel like that's SEO gaslighting. And I mean, that's not a bad instinct, but the way YouTube and a lot of these platforms work now, if you want to reach people and get plugged into it, and get in front of people's eyes and ears, you've got to be talking about something they're already talking about.
Right. Right. And
that's often the trick.
Right. And so, that in itself seems just it seems like it presents a challenge to me. But I don't know. Like that's the constant balance that I'm trying to figure out.
Right. With these new performances behind this new record, has this album or your experience up until this point informed any sort of changes to the live show or, even sort of and this, again, this will be one of the last things that we kind of get into, but even the pandemic, for example, the kinds of ways that audiences have kind of changed and have shifted and receive you, when they come out to see you live.
I find that most of the changes or the evolutions of my show are really conversations with myself about how I want to present what I do. It's interesting. I was just on the road with Clipping, and the Clipping is headlining. I was direct support, and we had an opening act called Pedestrian Deposit. That is a experimental noise outfit with two people. And I was telling them that what I was being reminded of and inspired by every time I saw them play, because it was very different. It was real noise. And it was not asking for permission to be noise. It was not giving you a story to set up the next noise song, right? They were just doing their thing. And I was telling them that what I want to borrow a little bit from that, and I found myself doing it on these last shows, was just being way more confident in the sound that's being made and the moment that's being had with the people in the room. Because I do tend to, I make a sort of unique kind of rap music. I mean, it's not unheard of, but it's not what you would necessarily expect. So there's already, like I said, the audacity is already there, right? But have always felt a need to give context to myself on stage in a way that's sort of disarming for people. And I just want to do that less. And I've been doing that a little less. But it's interesting though, because, this is a breakup album. So yeah, I'm doing songs from it. And it's different than when I do songs about the Robert Taylor Holmes projects or, songs about political commentary. It's a different feel. And so that's been a challenge for me, is how to weave it all together in a way that makes sense for my emotions on stage. And not feeling like I need to explain it all so much or ask for permission so much. That's sort of, what I've been wrestling with. But one of the interesting or what I'd say beneficial things for me, having done this as long as I have, there's two things. One, I think that's part of how I was able to make this album so fast, because I have come a long way as a recording artist. I know how to get what I want in the studio more than I ever have before, because of, hours after hours after hours and project after project. And I think the same thing is true on stage. I've just had so many stage reps. This is my 52nd tour that I just did. And there's just things I know how to do that I think make me sort of a dynamic performer in a way that can just lean on that more, and I think that's where I've been landing on the evolution of the station.
It's great to kind of hear from your perspective how that experience kind of informs your real-time progress and execution when you're pulling something off in terms of artistic direction and things that you've accomplished in the past, do these older projects and experiences also inform what you do now, especially in light of like, you know, at least within your own audience and a lot of these indie rap spaces, records like Dark Comedy and, you know, Brick Body Kids kind of going down as like classics in their own right. You know, do you ever feel like in light of what you do currently, a lot of these older projects start to kind of like loom large because they're sort of seen as like these kind of big moments where, you know, you pulled something off kind of massive. And, you know, does that ever feel like a disconnect from your own perspective? Do you ever look back and like, I remember doing that and I was just kind of like, you know, that was almost like any other project for me. I didn't know it was going to kind of expand into this thing that people perceived as like, whoa, this is like this high point.
Yeah, you know what? Yes, and the other side of that is there are projects that I felt just as strongly about that didn't resonate with people. But I do, as a person who, it's very important for me that when people come to see my show, they feel like they got their money's worth. Like they feel like they had a good time. They feel like they had an experience somewhat along the lines of what they were expecting. Maybe expecting is not the right word, but something close to that. And so it is important for me to know what songs are important to other people, even if they are not the most important to me. But I think that's part of the balance between doing a song that I feel like the whole crowd might help me sing along with, right? Gives me more space to do the new songs, very emotional, you know, and I don't ever want to do completely one or the other.
Mike, I appreciate you coming on and taking the time and again, getting into everything.
Hell yeah, man. Always. And thanks for having me, man. I appreciate you.